For those of you that I haven't met, I'm Jen Jelly. I'm the Executive Director of the Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota chapter of the ALS Association, and I'm thrilled to welcome you here to our new office space and the second event in our Gayle Sit Memorial Summer Speaker Series. We moved into this office just in February, and already it is changing how we serve the ALS community. Not only is it accessible, but it's centrally located, and it's given us room to operate and really engage with the ALS community. In fact, this room that we're all in is part of a multi-year initiative to really elevate the connections with those we serve. So you might notice that there's a lot of technology in this room, and that allows us to do things like video conferencing, demonstrations, webinars, live stream, all to support our core programs and services. And ultimately will allow us to connect with those we serve no matter where they live in our 3 states and no matter what mobility challenges they may be facing. This space also allows us to bring people in. We've had more people in our office in the last 4 months than ever before. And we're now hosting our support groups here, which allows individuals and their families to connect with each other. And it has allowed us to have you all here as part of this series. So this series is really focused on areas that are critical to the ALS community and that are at the core of our mission. So in June, we talked about ALS research and advances in gene therapy. Coming up in August, we'll be talking about advocacy and public policy. And today, we want to focus on the evolution of ALS Care and where it's headed. So as an organization that's very focused on care and support, we've seen a lot of change in the last 5 years, and most of that is a result of technology. In fact, the work that we're doing out of this room is a direct result of how technology has really influenced our mission. So to help us better understand how ALS Care is evolving, we have 2 guests with us here today, both from our partner and Certified Center of Excellence at the Minneapolis VA, Beau Bedore and Dan Greenwood. Beau is a speech and language pathologist. Dan is a registered dietitian. Both are extremely committed to the ALS community and have been instrumental in advancing care and quality of life for people living with ALS. And before I turn it over to Beau, I just wanted to point out a couple of housekeeping items. One, please feel free to grab nourishment this morning throughout the talk. And if you need to use the restroom today, please use the doors that are behind you and follow the signs. And to get into the restroom, you just need to hit the accessible paddle that's on the wall and it will open. But I am so thrilled. Beau is going to start us off this morning and we'll hand it over to Dan. So I'm thrilled to turn the reins over to you, Beau. You're welcome.
Good morning. As Jen said, my name is Beau Bedore, and I'm very happy to be here with you this morning to discuss care innovation and technology for those living with ALS. Our topic today is my own voice. I want to make clear from the outset that I have no financial or non-financial relationships to disclose with any of the manufacturer's products or resources that will be featured in today's presentation. And to begin our presentation this morning, I'd like to invite you to engage in a brief visualization exercise with me. So I know that we're only now getting to know each other for the first time, but I'd like you to ask to please settle into your chairs. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and I'm going to guide you through a very brief visualization. With your eyes closed, I want you to picture the face of a loved one clearly in your mind's eye. I want you to keep that face fixated in your mind and to be able to see it as clearly as if you were staring at a photograph of that person. Now I want you to imagine that in a moment, when I tell you to open your eyes, that your loved one is no longer going to be able to speak. And just let that thought sink in for a moment. I want you to ask yourself this question. What would you long to hear your loved one say if that person were no longer able to speak? Now go ahead and open your eyes. On your seat or next to you, all of you should have a note card that I asked Mike to distribute. I want you to just take a moment and write down what you heard as you did that visualization exercise. And if you're unable to write or you don't have a pen, please let that note card serve as a visual reminder of what you heard. When I asked my wife to do this visualization exercise with me, who she thought of was her grandpa, Wimpy Nelson, who died last winter and whose fondest parting salutation was "Happy days." When she did this exercise, she could still hear and even feel those heartfelt words in her mind. Would anyone else feel comfortable to share what they heard as they did that exercise? I know it's a personal reflection, and if people aren't comfortable, that's okay. Dan?
My wife says to our baby all the time, "Hey, Mr. Greenwood," and I just really love that.
And so as you did that, how did it feel when you imagined her saying that to you?
Yeah, it makes me happy. Yeah.
So I think what I hope this exercise illustrates is a sense of identity, connection, and intimacy that's conveyed in the voices of our loved ones. So let's now talk about how we preserve the voices of our loved ones with ALS. One method of voice preservation is message banking. Pictured here is John Costello of Boston Children's University, who's the godfather of message banking and pioneered this method. A lot of people confuse message banking and voice banking, but the two are not the same. Message banking is the process of digitally recording your natural voice. And this digital recording retains the natural inflection and intonation of your voice, or what speech pathologists refer to as prosody, that sing-song quality of your voice. So let's take a moment to listen to an example of message banking.
Oh, I think you need to.
Do I need to click on it?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
Good morning. My name is Beau Bedore. I am a...
Oh, sorry, you guys.
Good morning. My name is Beau Bedore. I am a speech pathologist and assistive technology professional at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center. The voice you are hearing is a digital recording of my voice.
It's an example of message banking. It's digital. It sounds like my natural voice. Voice banking, on the other hand, is the process of recording a large inventory of your speech. Most platforms, like the most common one, Model Talker, require you to spend 7 to 8 hours recording an inventory of 1,600 phrases. These phrases are stored into a large database that sound engineers use to parse apart the individual sounds of English or whatever language you're recording in to create a synthetic voice, or what we refer to as a computer model of your voice. Let's listen to an example of voice banking.
Good morning. My name is Beau Bedore. I am a speech pathologist and assistive technology professional at the Minneapolis VA Medical Center. The voice you are hearing is a computer model of my voice. I created this synthetic voice in just 30 minutes using an innovative new program called My Own Voice by Acapella.
So if people have spent any amount of time listening to synthesized voices, the quality can greatly vary.
Good morning. Good morning.
I want to introduce you to this new revolutionary program called My Own Voice by Acapella. While Model Talker is the most commonly used platform, the technology is rapidly improving, and I want to make everyone here aware of this exciting new platform because it's helping our veterans with ALS complete the voice banking process and preserving that important aspect of their identity. There are two typical approaches to voice banking. In the past, platforms like Model Talker would use an approach called unit selection that you see pictured there on the right of this slide. Unit selection involves recording that massive database of phrases, up to 1,600 phrases, so that sound engineers can parse apart the individual sounds, or what they call units of speech, so that they can glue them together to create a computer model of your voice. What's so exciting about this new approach that My Own Voice is using is that it's creating what's called a deep neural network voice. This is using machine learning and machine algorithms to create an artificial human vocal tract. So if you see here on the left, in a normal human vocal tract, we produce different vowel sounds in specific places in our oral cavity. And what the machine software is able to do is to take a very small script of just 350 sentences and create a computer model of your voice that mimics your natural human vocal tract. And that's what you heard in that previous example. So let's first illustrate how unit selection works. Victor Poggle, who's the head of engineering and research and development at Acapella, illustrates this process with the word impressive. If we think about the word impressive, the first sound or unit in that word is the chunk imp, which comes from the word impossible. The second chunk comes from the word president. And the third chunk comes from the word detective. When we take these individual chunks or units and we glue them together, we get the word impressive. The problem is that when we chunk or glue these units together, it can sound quite artificial and be hard for people to understand. I want to illustrate the difference between the DNN technology, which is the new technology, and the older unit selection technology by playing a couple of examples for you to hear and compare. Now, when we think about synthesized speech, the goal is always to reproduce a human voice. What's unique about human speech is that it is both natural and intelligible, that is, easily understood. And we're going to use 4 target sentences that you'll listen to hear the differences between the two approaches. The sentences here, seen at the bottom of the slide, are how old are you? Can you understand me okay? I need an appointment with my dentist, and we need to talk. This is an example of a voice created using unit selection. And again, what you'll notice is that it sounds natural, but that it sounds choppy.
How old are you? Can you understand my okay? I need an appointment with my dentist. We need to talk.
Now that's an example of a typical sounding unit selection synthesized voice. The new technology, on the other hand, the DNN technology, is able to take that speech and greatly improve the quality by making it sound both natural and intelligible. But I'll let you be the judge as you listen to this second example. Same patient, but now that voice is being processed through the artificial human vocal tract that was made using machine learning.
How old are you? Can you understand me okay? I need an appointment with my dentist. We need to talk.
Now, I think most people would agree that that's quite a remarkable improvement in the quality and intelligibility of the voice. Do people agree that that second example was easier to understand? I think we can all agree. So what's really exciting about this is that hands down, we can get a more optimal quality synthesized voice in 1/5 the amount of time. And this is important because even though the technology is rapidly improving, there are still significant barriers to providing all patients with ALS with a high quality synthesized voice. And the greatest barrier that I hear over and over again from patients in our clinic is simply the time that it takes to record these voices. Using the most common platform, Model Talker, patients have to spend up to 8 hours to record that inventory of 1,600 sentences, and it often requires multiple visits to a specialized clinic. The other problem is that for those very motivated patients that think they can get it done at home, oftentimes they'll start the process, they'll get about 1/3 of the way into it, and then they never actually complete the inventory, and so they're left without a voice. As we know, the disease progresses all too fast in many cases, and so they miss out on this wonderful opportunity. That's where My Own Voice comes in. If we did a head-to-head comparison of the 2 most common platforms that people are using in the community, we can see that over here on the right, My Own Voice can be completed in a fraction of that time. The example that you heard earlier, I did in our assistive technology lab in just 30 minutes. So what I typically do in clinic is I schedule somebody for a 90-minute session that gives us ample opportunity to allow for breaks if necessary. And in just one session, they can get a high-quality synthesized voice. Now I'm going to play those 4 target sentences that we listened to earlier, but now you're going to hear my synthesized voice in this next example.
How old are you? Can you understand me okay? I need an appointment with my dentist. We need to talk.
Again, it's still a computer model of my voice. We haven't achieved the level of a natural human-sounding voice, but we're getting closer all the time. And the important point is that it captures the essence of your voice. And it's that essence, just like when you did that visualization exercise, that really conveys the sense of identity for our patients, the sense of connection that we feel when we communicate with them, and the sense of intimacy that can be achieved through the preservation of human voices. One of my favorite features as a clinician are the account management features. My own voice, with feedback from myself and John and other clinicians in the community, has developed a web interface that allows me as the clinician to go in and create a new account for the user the very same day of their first clinic appointment. So I can provide that initial education, and if they're interested, I can go right into the software and create their account so that in as little as a week, I can get them back in clinic to complete this voice banking process. Other programs require you to submit a request, then there's a delay period and you have to wait for a reply to get your account credentials. Now that process has all been streamlined up front, which again makes access easier and helps us to overcome those barriers to recording your voice. The other feature that I think is important to mention is that the Acapella Recorder software, which can be downloaded online for free, runs on both Windows and Mac. And it uses the same headset that's familiar to us and is recommended by those who have completed Model Talker. If you look at the Acapella Recorder software, you can see here in this slide that the same sentences that we would use in other voice banking programs appear on the screen. These sentences don't always make sense, but they don't have to. What the sound engineers are looking for are the sounds or chunks of the English language that they need to create your voice. Now, my own voice uses the new DNN voice technology as the default. So they're realizing that the computer model of these voices is far superior. And so by default, every user that completes the program is going to start with a 350 sentence inventory. But if people want to go on and do a head-to-head comparison and see what their voice sounds like with the newer technology compared with the older unit selection technology, they still have that option. And when they complete the recording, they can choose to go on and proceed to record more of that inventory. But I'll tell you this, of all the patients that I've had in clinic, and we did our very first recording in July of 2017, in just 2 years' time since Dr. Teriyaki came back from the International ALS Symposium and told me about this software, we've had 38 patients in just 2 years complete this program. So it's provided a way for patients with ALS to more readily complete the voice banking process, and almost all of them will choose the DNN voice technology because it's far superior. And you heard that in the previous example. Other features that I want to mention that I'm very excited about is that my own voice offers support for multiple languages. They're always adding new languages, and they're even going to add a bilingual feature. So if you speak both English and Spanish, you can create a synthesized voice in both of your languages. And I think perhaps the best feature of all, and this is where we can build upon the great work of John Costello, is that my own voice is able to create a high-quality DNN voice using 550 digitally recorded sentences that are part of message banking. So this is a really great feature because a lot of people want to do message banking and voice banking. Message banking, as you recall, is that digital recording where we preserve the natural intonation and inflection of our voice. And John Costello has worked with these engineers to develop a process where if people sit down and record 550 digital recordings, they can upload these recordings to a new program called mymessagebanking.com, and the sound engineers at Acapella can take these recordings and create a DNN voice for you based on the message banking recordings. So what that means is that patients with ALS can double dip, and they're getting great quality voice. It's a very robust communication option, and it saves them time. So what I'm going to play in this next example is John Costello's voice that was created through this process of message banking. It's still a computer model of the voice, but it sounds even more natural because it's based on digital recordings.
How old are you? Can you understand me okay? I need an appointment with my dentist. We need to talk.
So if you've ever heard John's voice, he's very soft-spoken, has a very pleasant voice, but that sounds almost exactly like him. So this is really groundbreaking technology that we're now seeing in the community.
How old are you?
The other thing I'll mention is that my own voice is supported by all of the major augmentative communication software platforms. Communicator 5 by Tobii Dynavox and Grid 3 for the Windows platform will support my own voice. And just recently, Predictable, which is an app that can run on both iOS and Android, now offers seamless integration of your my own voice. So if you're using a PC-based augmentative communication device, like an iGay speech generating device, you can use it on that Windows platform as well as mobile platforms and tablets. So it gives us a really new option that we haven't had in the past. The Minneapolis VA, thanks to Dr. Teriyaki, was the first VA to pilot my own voice. And as I mentioned, we've already had 38 patients complete this program in just 2 years' time. And more VAs are utilizing it. At last count, there were 7 VAs, and more are going to be adopting my own voice in the future. For patients with ALS that are non-veterans, Team Gleason is now funding these voices as of February 2019. So we have 2 great funding options. If you're a veteran, you're eligible for funding through the Veterans Affairs Association, or if you're a non-veteran, Team Gleason will foot the bill. And I think this is important because the cost of my own voice is about 10 times the cost of Model Talker. Model Talker runs $100 for the voice, and my own voice, if you purchase a one-time lifetime license, is $1,000. So the fact that they're paying for this software, I think, is a really wonderful incentive. Before we close, I want to take a moment to reflect on the words of Mary Garlitz. Mary is the wife of one of our dear veterans, Quentin Garlitz, who died last week. Quentin was a very dear veteran, and I worked with him for 3 years. He was diagnosed at Mayo in March of 2016 and completed voice banking with me using the My Own Voice program in September of 2017. And I want us all to take a moment to reflect on Mary's words. What if you woke up one day and could not hear your loved one say, "I love you"? This is a traumatic experience. We all take things for granted, but the loss of this happening is devastating. Hearing my husband's voice is one of my precious memories. You feel like your loved one is still with you. In closing, I want to say that every patient with ALS deserves a voice. Our voice conveys our sense of identity, it promotes our human connection, and it provides for intimacy in our conversations. So I want to thank the ALS Association for this opportunity to raise awareness about this important issue of voice preservation. I hope that you find this news of this exciting new innovative program to be a wonderful advantage in the clinical care that you provide to veterans. And I want to express my sincere gratitude to the ALS Association in fulfilling their mission of empowering people affected by ALS to live their lives to the fullest. Human communication matters, and this innovative new technology makes a difference. So thank you for your attention this morning.
I just want to say that I love our team at the Minneapolis VA. I've worked with Beau now for about 12 years, Dr. Teriyaki for about 6. And I really think we have a good thing going, and I'm excited about what the future has in store. Thanks. So I'm Dan Greenwood. I'm the Veterans Health Education Coordinator at the Minneapolis VA. And then in my other time, I'm a PhD student. So my dissertation is looking at survival and quality of life and the idea of optimal timing in patients with ALS in a feeding tube. And so I want to start off by asking you a question. And so that question is, When you think feeding tube, what comes to mind? So I'm asking you. I want to hear at least 4 examples of when you think feeding tube, what comes to mind? Nourishment, swallowing trouble, discomfort. Others?
Physically limiting.
Physically limiting.
Nuisance.
Nuisance. So with this question, this is something I oftentimes ask in clinic. I'm going to go through the 4 primary things that I hear. The first is the lived experience of other people that they know that have had a feeding tube. So this can be people that they've encountered in support groups with ALS that have had a feeding tube. It can be individuals in their family, their friends, their community that have had cancer and have had a feeding tube. I've heard from one person, in the example here, I had a patient where he had a son with Down syndrome. So with Down syndrome, you can have the inability to swallow. And so immediately when I asked him this question, when you think feeding tube, what comes to mind? He thought, well, I had a son that had a feeding tube and lived for 18 years with that feeding tube. And so oftentimes people self-reflect on what's the experience that I've had in people that I've known that have had that feeding tube. With that, a lot of times people are thinking the type of feeding tube we're talking about is the kind that goes from your nose into your stomach. And so I had one person where I asked them, feeding tube, what comes to mind? He said, well, my girlfriend had a bad gastrointestinal disease and had that type of feeding tube and we couldn't kiss, or kissing was uncomfortable. And so from that, if you ask that question, you can pull what are the lived experiences and relationships that they've heard from other people. The next is, how is it physically going to change them, the requirement of surgery, and are they going to be connected to tubes and devices, and is that going to impact their quality of life? I brought a feeding tube. If you think, essentially inflate your stomach full of air, poke a hole in it, and then stick this in there, it hangs outside of your abdomen, just like this, okay? How you feed it, or get fed, is if you've put oil into a car, it's kind of like that. It's got a syringe, and you can just essentially dump oil into it. Don't dump oil into it, please. But dump tube feeding into it. So with that, asking this question, again, it can dispel some of the myths about feeding tubes. The next is, how does this relate to the people that I love the most? How does it impact the cares that they receive daily? Is it going to make their life easier? Are they going to have energy to spend time with their loved ones? Is it going to help them live longer? I think is another important thing. So how does it impact those people that they care about the most? And lastly, what does this mean about their remaining time on Earth? Does it buy them time, and how does that impact their quality of life? And so with that, things to know about feeding tubes in ALS. So again, the type of feeding tube that we're talking about is one that's surgically inserted. So it's surgically inserted into the stomach. It's not one that ever goes through the nose. If you look at international research, the rates of people that have a feeding tube placed, it's roughly 40%. That being said, if you get care in a specialty ALS center, it's typically closer to 60 to 70%. We see it's most common in people that have bulbar onset ALS, which is where you have swallowing impairment as your initial symptom. We do know that about 80% of people with ALS will eventually develop some type of swallowing impairment. So in 2017, in the Journal of Neurology, there was an editorial which discussed the idea of optimal timing. And so this idea is really important. And the reason I say that is reflection on, is it going to extend my life? And is it going to improve my quality of life? And so what the research shows is that for all patients with ALS, there's a number of studies that look at this, and we cannot say that for every single patient, a feeding tube is going to extend your life. Okay? On the flip side of that, honestly, all of the research, or pretty close to all of the research, says it either has a neutral or positive impact on your quality of life. And I say that with a caveat because there's some research now that talks about the disability paradox. So that's where an able-bodied individual may look at somebody that has significant physical disabilities and think their quality of life is not good. However, what the research shows is that people adapt and evolve and find a new normal. And so I think that's a really important thing, is that oftentimes when we're considering this intervention early in the disease course, we think, gosh, that sounds terrible. But when we're actually at that point in the disease course, people adapt and find a way to find and maintain their quality of life. And so who should consider a feeding tube? We know that the majority of people with ALS are going to lose weight. There's really interesting research on this, that ALS can actually cause people to burn more calories than what we would expect. And then we also know that the majority of people are going to have swallowing difficulty. So again, if you're already burning calories like you're a teenage boy, and then you also can't swallow or you can't feed yourself, there's a good chance that you're going to lose weight. And that's where working with a dietitian to help increase your calorie intake can be a really important tool. Again, the majority of people will develop some type of swallowing difficulty. Shortness of breath. So when I describe this in clinic, I'm a runner, so I always use running as an analogy. And a lot of people aren't runners, so maybe they don't get my analogy, but I say, imagine you're going up a flight of stairs and you're trying to eat a meal. Or like you're out on a run and you're trying to eat a meal. When you're short of breath with ALS, it's kind of like that. So there's ways that we can work around that, but as people get more and more short of breath, what we tend to find is it reduces your appetite and it makes it very, very difficult in order to get enough calories. Then another thing is it may just make your life easier. And so with that, again, if it's difficult to feed yourself and you're relying on somebody else, I always tell people, my patients, you can eat what you want to eat, whatever that is, and then get your primary nutrition through a feeding tube. And I think a lot of people find quality of life in that component. On the flip side of that, we also need to consider who should not get a feeding tube. And the thing I would say, in the 12 years I've worked in this field, the one thing that I understand the most now is if you cannot breathe, there aren't a lot of other things that matter. The ability to tolerate the interventions to help you breathe are really, honestly, I think the most important piece in terms of helping you feel comfortable and living longer. And so with that, there's two forms of treatment really with ALS. And so BiPAP or CPAP, you're probably familiar with CPAP because of people with sleep apnea, but BiPAP is more common in ALS. I'll have patients in clinic where they say, you know what, that's not for me. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to wear that. And I say that's really, really important. Like you got to work with the respiratory therapist, make sure that you can get a good fit and be comfortable. Because if we have patients that doesn't work for them and they're not planning on doing something more invasive like a tracheostomy, we know that their length of life just is going to become very short, okay? So like that would be a reason why I would say if that's not part of the cards, then I think we need to consider a feeding tube may not be appropriate. And kind of the second thing with that is if someone comes into clinic and they've already lost a really significant amount of weight. And so the only research on this really shows like 25% of what a normal weight would have been like for you before you had ALS. So say for most people, that's like 40 or 50 pounds. What we know is that kind of if they've lost that much weight, the disease is oftentimes so far progressed that unless they're going to do really invasive things, like a tracheostomy, a feeding tube may not be appropriate because, again, the disease just may be too far along. The other thing is that one of the most frustrating components of ALS is that 10 to 15% of people can develop a really terrible form of dementia. And we can screen for this in clinic. And I would say the experience that we've had is sometimes people with this form of dementia that have a feeding tube can outlive what they would desire for their quality of life. So that's something that I think is a necessary screening component within the disease course. And then the other component is you just may not need one. And so we do have some patients that they don't have swallowing difficulty. They haven't lost weight. And so a feeding tube may not be appropriate for them. And so the conclusion is I want to take a huge big step back, because I think what we talk about is interventions. So what can you do? What can you do? What can you do? What can you do? And if I had to say, the question that's more important is, what do you want the remainder of your life experience to be like? And so this is a question that I've asked in clinic and has been really helpful. And so I asked this, I had a patient where we were talking about the option of a feeding tube or not, and I said, well, what do you see the rest of your life looking like? And he said, well, we're in the midst of doing home modifications right now, and they're going to be done within the next 6 months, and I want some time to live in that house with my wife. And he was losing weight so rapidly. And I said, okay, so it sounds like the thing that's most important to you is the ability to enjoy time with your wife in your home. I said, the choice between so right now, choosing not to get a feeding tube is inconsistent with the thing that's most important to you. And so by kind of drawing that out for him, he was able to see, yes, okay, you're right. That is something that I need to do. And so in any intervention that you're thinking about with ALS, you should have a vision for this. And so my kind of homework for all of you would be to reflect on, what do you want the remainder of your life experience to be like? And then you need to have this be the driving force in your care. So you need to know this personally, you need to share this with the people that you love the most, and you need to share this with your healthcare team. Because as we know this, we then know what is the most appropriate course and intervention. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dan. Well, thank you to both Beau and Dan for their presentations. We'll have time for some questions in just a few minutes. And I also know, actually I didn't ask you this, but I'm pretty confident they're willing to stay afterwards for a little while if you all have want to have further conversation. But we wanted to take a minute and introduce you to Steve Lucan to share with you how some of the things that Beau and Dan have impacted his journey with ALS. So I am going to actually introduce Steve and Stacy. Stacy, you're going to hold the mic, yes?
I have to do that.
Okay. Bear with us for a second.
Where are you? Turn around.
So everybody can see your pretty face. Is it on? Yeah, okay, great. I'll give you that.
Might take a second. He's using his eyes. Keep his up here.
Thank you for allowing me to give you a glimpse into my life with ALS and technology. I wrote this using just my eyes. I wrote this using just my eyes.
He's testing out a new grid here on grid 3, one of the programs, and it sometimes gets a little glitchy like that where it repeats something. So we'll see what it happens.
As I think about how technology has impacted my life as this disease has progressed, I don't know how people manage to live day to day without complete frustration without technology. There are many different types of technology to provide the best and easiest way for people with ALS to communicate their needs. I am at a point in my disease progression that I require an eye gaze device. I am still able to communicate needs to my caregivers without having to play charades as to what I need. I also have the ability to continue to communicate with email and texts, which allows me to stay connected to family and friends. I can also use the internet to do our finances and stay connected on social media. With the development of software, I have the possibility to control a smart home, which includes my TV, lights, thermostat, and doors. It has allowed me to keep some independence while all other aspects of my life are dependent on others. There's still frustrating times when the technology does not work. We caregivers and a person with ALS need to have patience when it doesn't work. We have learned that we should have played more charades without the family growing up. Thank you for allowing me to give you a glimpse into my life with ALS and technology. I wrote this using just my eyes.
So Steve was diagnosed 5.5 years ago. And right away, his biggest fear was breathing. He has severe asthma, and so that was something he was very concerned about. And he knew that that might eventually impact his ability to speak, and it would impact his ability to get a feeding tube down the road if he wanted one. And as his breathing took nosedive, Dr. Teriyaki wisely said, it's time to think about this. And so Steve has had a feeding tube for 4 years. Yep, 4 years. We didn't use it for nourishment for, well, really, for the most part until last year. Last summer, we started using it for nourishment to give him his medications when swallowing got harder. And now he is full-time using his feeding tube. That feeding tube over there isn't one you have to stick with always, right? Kind of didn't talk about that. They can replace it, kind of if you think about your pierced ears, once they heal, they can replace that feeding tube with one that we call a button. And so Steve doesn't have that tube dangling out of him. He's got just a little, almost like an wheat belly button sticking out of his belly that we put the tube into when we feed him. And that has been wonderful for him. It's allowed him to not worry about choking or anything anymore. And it's really helping him maintain his quality of life. We're still trying to figure out the whole getting enough calories thing, but we're working on that. And as far as his voice banking, he did that, well, 5 years ago. He was a math and computer science teacher, and so he right away was researching how can you do this, what's the technology behind it, all of that. So his was recorded a long time ago, in prehistoric times when it comes to voice banking. And I know he has worked with a couple different programs here. He, being the computer science guy, has tried probably, 4 or 5 different programs for the eye gaze. Well, not really eye gaze, but the speech communication piece. And he has also kind of had hit or miss luck between the Toby and the Microsoft Surface device. And so he's been going back and forth between that. You can see my wonderful tape holding this one together. One of the biggest frustrations with this, though, a place where they could improve down the road, is the ability to go outside. If you think about, especially your older phones, when you went outside in the sunlight, how you couldn't see your screen, or trying to read on your Kindle or your Nook or whatever, when you get these devices in the sunshine, it's really hard. Very hard to see the screen, very hard for your eyes to be picked up by the computer. And that's one of our hopes, is that down the road that can be improved for people, because a lot of us like to be outside, and that really impacts his ability to communicate with himself there. Right? Anything else? So thank you to everybody for your support and for helping him get the equipment he needs.
So we're going to open it up for questions for Beau and Dan, and I'm actually going to have you guys use this mic to address them. But do any of you have questions for Beau or Dan?
question, and Steve might know the answer, but I don't. If somebody recorded their voice a long time ago on Model Talker, can it be digitized to the new form?
So for those of you that are watching the live stream, the question was, if you previously recorded your voice using a platform like Model Talker, can you upgrade your voice to one of the newer platforms? That is a great question, Stacy. And Steve, I thought your voice sounded really great, given that it was 5-year-old technology. And for those of you who have never used eye-gaze communication, you did a remarkably great job of selecting your messages, and your delivery was just great. The question that you asked is a really good one, and what I would say is that my contact in France, who represents my own voice, his name is Nicholas Mazars, and he deserves special acknowledgement because he gave me permission to share with you some of his slides. That gentleman that you saw in one of my slides, Vincent Poggle, he is just a brainiac in the head of their R&D department. He would be a person to talk about because theoretically, if those files are stored somewhere, they might be able to parse apart those sounds and then upgrade the quality. So what I will do after this presentation is I will email Nicholas that question, and then if you give me your contact information, I could get back to you with a reply. Great job. Yeah, Robert.
Is there a difference? Is there more people in the population that are veterans versus non-veterans that have ALS? And then my second question would be, how does it compare from the US to like other countries around the world?
Do you want to speak to that?
Yeah. Yes, so military veterans are at about a 60% greater risk of development of ALS, and that's any veteran population within the United States.
Do we any idea why?
So when we look at occupations, so the first thing I'd say is the research isn't great on this. You look at occupations, so it's professional athletes, so football players, soccer players have a little bit higher rate of ALS. There's also some people that are in the trades where potential chemical exposure can increase the risk of ALS. And I say this as a dietitian that's read the research, and I realize there's neurologists in the room that can explain it better. But yeah, so I would say military veterans are at a higher risk. I don't know if that fully answered your question.
So it seems like maybe some of it's either from chemicals or from the physical nature, absolute physical nature of your job, being an athlete or military.
And people that are good athletes actually have a higher rate of ALS. And then there's a connection between potentially smoking and ALS as well.
Okay. And Robert, to Dan's point related to athleticism, if you think about the disease of ALS, in the United States, it's most commonly known as, and today the real champion of the ALS movement, at least in the public's eye, is, so you think two extraordinary athletes.
Then I think the genetic research on this is really the thing that's developing the most. I'm seeing Dr. Teriyaki, and I don't know if she can speak to that, but that may be something afterwards.
What is the cost of the software and how is it funded?
So that's a great question. The question was, what is the cost of the software? On one of the slides that I highlighted, we compared the two programs head to head. There was Model Talker and My Own Voice. And it's a great question because Model Talker is very accessible to people due to its low cost. If you complete the Model Talker program, it's $100 to purchase that voice. My Own Voice, on the other hand, offers two payment options. You can get your voice license on a month-to-month basis, which is $100 a month, or you can purchase a one-time license fee that's good for your entire life, and that costs $1,000. So I think the important thing to emphasize is even though My Own Voice is technically 10 times the price, we have two great funding options at this time. We have the VA as a funding source, and we have Team Gleason as an additional funding source.
Well, what about the cost of the different softwares on the actual devices once you've got your voice bank?
So Stacy brings up a good question. What is the cost of the actual augmentative communication software? I think in answering that question, we need to think about the type of device that the individual with ALS is using. There are Windows-based communication solutions, which in the Tobii Dynavox line of products would include the i15 Plus that Steve is currently using, or the mobile tablet version, which is a combination of an eye-based camera that is paired with a Microsoft Surface tablet. They brand that as the EM12. Those are the two most common Windows-based options. But Tobii Dynavox is not the only manufacturer. Talk to Me Technologies is another manufacturer. Forbes AAC, as well as Accessibility Solutions. So there are many different manufacturers that represent these PC-based solutions. And the cost of Communicator, last I checked, is on the order of $500.
and that's similar to Grid 3, which is the other predominant Windows-based platform. In the mobile side of technology devices, the software that is compatible with either Model Talker or My Own Voice is the Predictable app. And I think that retails on both Android and the Apple App Store for about $189. So you're looking at somewhere between $200 and $500 for the actual software on top of the cost of the voice, which can range from $100 to $1,000. It's a great question. I think as Steve mentioned, he's able to control his lights, you're able to control the phone and other technologies. Do you control the thermostat as well, Steve?
He could, but
Good.
we haven't upgraded it.
And I think Steve is a good person to ask, do your smart speakers have any difficulty understanding your synthesized voice?
No, unless there's background noise.
Background noise, and I think that's true of any synthesized voice. What I can tell you, Mike, is that the voice synthesizers are getting better all the time. So whether you're using a commercial off-the-shelf voice synthesizer or your own voice, the smart speakers, in my experience, have no difficulty understanding the speech output from the device. And I think it's only going to get better.
Is there good support for this software?
The question was, is there good support for this software? I think one of the barriers that I mentioned is time, but an additional barrier is either the lack of understanding of the various options that are available. I think historically people tend to think Model Talker and they don't realize that there's an innovative new alternative. But I think the other thing is the clinical experience that the person has. It's important for the voice making process to take place in a quiet environment using the right headset so that you get good recording quality. And I think it's also important if you are going to record a larger inventory of phrases, that you make sure that the distance from your mouth to the microphone is consistent so that you don't get variations in quality, which is another reason that I like My Own Voice. It can be completed in just one session, and so the quality is consistent for the duration of the recording. Any other questions before I give it back to Jim?
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate it. One thing I wanted to highlight is that the chapter here has our Herbeck Sing Communication and Assistive Device program, where we work with families on covering things like smart home technology. We'll work with you to outfit your home. We cover the cost of that, and we can work with you on what those options might be best for you in conjunction with your clinic. So before you invest in anything on your own, please talk to us because we can help you through that process and handle some of that for you. So if you have questions about that, please come see me or any of the staff afterwards, but I wanted to make sure that you knew that that was available. So a huge thank you to our guests, for Beau, Dan, and Steve for sharing this morning. I am always so encouraged to hear what's happening, especially in terms of technology and how it's advancing care and quality of life. And I think what it continues to underscore is that we need to keep our foot on the gas in terms of further developments into that space, especially on extending quality of life, because it is so clear that extending quality and length of life will lead to further progress in research towards treatments and a cure. So we'd like to invite you all to join us in accelerating those efforts by making a gift, if you so choose. If you'd like to support some of the work that you heard about today, we're going to be passing donation cards throughout the room. And for those of you that are joining us via live stream, there is a link on the YouTube channel to make a donation if you so choose. I wanted to highlight that you can choose to, if you want to make a gift, it can support ALS Care. It can also support ALS research, or both. But if you do decide to make a gift to ALS research, you have the opportunity for your gift to be matched, thanks to a very generous commitment from Christy and Larry Waite, who are here with us today. Every new or increased gift to ALS research will be matched dollar for dollar up to $10,000. So that means if you've never made a gift to ALS research before, your gift will be matched 100%. If you have given a gift to research before, first of all, thank you. And second of all, any increase over last year's gift will be matched dollar for dollar. But I also want to point out that in addition to the research we do towards treatments, disease, understanding the disease, the ALS Association also invests in research on technology and how to advance quality of life. So they're very tied together. So I just wanted to make that distinction for you all, that it's part of our global research program as well. Lastly, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for bringing life into our new space. We're so happy that you're here. We'll be around afterwards to answer any further questions that you might have, or just to hang out and chat. I still see that there are pastries over the size of your heads, so please eat those before you take off today. But thank you again to our presenters. We look forward to keeping you all updated on our progress here, and please enjoy the rest of your day.